All right, welcome back. Hope you all had a great weekend. Today we're continuing our review of our latest RBT practice exam, where we're going through 10 more questions and breaking them down together. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please like and subscribe. If you're looking for our proven study materials, please check out rbtexamreview.com. We offer 3 full practice exams, a task list study guide, combo pack, which comes with everything. It's our best deal. And of course, our competency study guide as well. Those links are in the comments and descriptions below. Questions, comments, love to help. Let me know. Other than that, let's keep working hard, keep studying hard, get to our questions. Question 1. Client will fall to the floor and crawl under his desk when given math worksheets. Which of the following would be the most appropriate replacement behavior to teach? If you get a replacement behavior question, the first thing we need to identify is 1, the behavior we're replacing. 2, what is the function of the behavior we are replacing? So what behavior are we replacing? Well, the client falling to the floor and crawling under the desk when given math worksheets. If this occurs when he's given math worksheets, what can we hypothesize is the function? Well, escape, right? It's pretty clearly escape given the information in the question. Now, why is it important to identify the function of the behavior we're replacing? Because when you teach a replacement behavior, you want that behavior to be what we call functionally equivalent, meaning it serves the same purpose as the behavior you're replacing. It's a rule in ABA that if we're going to take away a behavior, we need to replace it with another one. We can't remove something that meets a function without giving another behavior back. So we need to find a replacement behavior that is functionally equivalent. In other words, is going to serve the same function as escape. So A, teach the client to take deep breaths when given worksheets. Now, this might help with quote unquote frustration or however you want to describe it, but is it going to help with the escape? No, he's still having to do the worksheets. B, provide the client with extra recess time for completing his homework. Is this a replacement behavior or is this a consequence? What's a consequence, right? Now we're saying, okay, you want to go on the desk. If you complete your worksheet, I'll give you extra recess time. This might be a great consequence intervention, who knows? But it's not a replacement behavior. C, teach the client to request a short break. All right, now we are replacing falling to the floor, crawling under the desk with teaching the client to request a short break. It serves the same function as escape, just more appropriate and socially valid. And then D, praise the client before the math worksheet is handed out. This looks like some sort of maybe non-contingent reinforcement. Either way, it's not teaching a replacement behavior. The only one that is teaching a functionally equivalent replacement behavior is going to be C, teach the client to request a short break. Excuse me. John engages in hand flapping when sitting on the floor of his house. If I put a book next to John, the hand flapping stops. The book functions as a blank. What is the question asking about? They're asking about the book, okay, and what it functions as. And if we look at the answer choices, it's a reinforcer punisher question. What is our process for reinforcer punisher questions? We ask ourselves, did the behavior increase or decrease? Did we add or take away something? We know if the behavior increased, it's a reinforcer. If it decreased, it's a punisher. If we added something, it's positive. If we took away something, it's negative. So in this case, we know John engages in hand flapping. When we put the book next to John, adding the book, the hand flapping stops. So did the behavior increase or decrease? Well, it decreased. We added the book, causing the behavior to decrease / stop. So it's positive punishment. If we look at B, positive punisher. Remember, punishment and reinforcement have nothing to do with the topography of the stimulus or the consequence. It's all about how it impacts behavior. And if we put a book next to John and he stops flapping his hands, that's punishing. That book functions as a positive punisher. Chuck is teaching his son how to build a shelf. The first thing he must do is gather supplies. Then he needs to assemble the shelf according to the instructions. If Chuck reinforces his son after gathering supplies, what type of chaining is he most likely using? Think about it. Let's go back and read it again. We want to do all of our work up front. We want to do all of our work on the question. All the information you need is in the question. You should be able to start predicting answers the closer you get to the test. In this case, we know Chuck is teaching his son to build a shelf. The first thing he must do is gather supplies. The question asks, if Chuck reinforces his son after gathering supplies, what type of chaining is he using? If we're reinforcing a client or a learner or anybody in a task chain after the first step, what type of chaining is that? Well, it's going to be forward chaining, right? Forward chaining, we reinforce for completing the first step independently, then we go through the rest. Then we reinforce first and second and go through the rest, so on and so forth. Backwards chaining would be whatever the last step in this chain is, that's when we reinforce. Total task chaining would be going through the entire chain and only teaching the necessary steps. Chuck isn't doing that. He's just starting to teach his son how to build a shelf. And as soon as his son gathers supplies, the first step, he's going to forward chain. Don't pick task analysis. It's not a task analysis. What is a task analysis? A task analysis creates the chain. So Chuck had to do a task analysis to create the chain for building the shelf. Now that they're building the shelf, now they're using the actual chain. There's a difference between task analysis and task chaining. Be careful. Next question. Tally marks would be most appropriate to use for what type of measurement? Think about a tally mark, right? Something happens, we make a mark. Something happens, we make a mark. And they are cumulative. Tally marks are cumulative, right? When would it be most appropriate to use tally marks? A, partial interval. Now, think about a partial interval recording. If our interval is 2 minutes long and the behavior happens, how many tally marks do we use? 1. We're either going to use 0 tally marks or 1 tally mark for partial interval. It doesn't really make a difference what kind of mark you use, right? Because you're only recording 1 response per interval in every way. Anyway, you're not taking a cumulative measure of how many times something happens, okay? Partial interval is fine, but is there something better? Duration. Would you use tally marks for duration? No, duration is going to mark the amount of time, right? So we should be using stopwatches. We should be using precise measurements of time for duration. Same with inter-response time. If we're dealing with inter-response time and we're dealing with time in between responses, we want precision. So use something precise like a stopwatch or a phone watch. Event recording. Event recording is literally, by Cooper definition, using tally marks, right, to record events. So something happens, whatever we're measuring, boom, tally mark. And it's cumulative. So we're going to see how often it occurs. Partial interval is fine. Event recording is just significantly better for using tally marks. David works in an office park, which has assigned spaces for everyone who works there. One spot is labeled CEO, but David constantly parks there anyway, but not on purpose. David wants to correct this behavior. He needs to work on what? What is David doing wrong? You should be able to identify this as a discrimination or differentiation question almost immediately. It's not generalization. We're not generalizing this behavior to anything. It's not prompting. Yes, maybe we use prompts to teach David, but no prompting is occurring here. David's making a mistake. We want to correct it. And is David making a mistake with discrimination or differentiation? Think about discrimination, also known as stimulus discrimination. Discrimination is telling the difference between 2 or more stimuli. If one parking spot has CEO and another doesn't, 2 different stimuli. David is not able to discriminate between the spots. Differentiation, also known as response differentiation, is different responses. David is only engaging in parking. It's the same response regardless of the stimuli. He just needs to park in the correct spot. He needs to be able to discriminate between the CEO parking spot and the non-CEO parking spot. What does David need to work on? A, discrimination. A behavior analyst is concerned about a client's response rate. The client is slow to respond to certain pleasantries like, hello, what's your name? How are you? What dimension of responding behavior should the analyst target? Very easy question if you know measurement. Okay, very easy, right? What is the problem? Problem is the client is slow to respond to things like, hello, what's your name and how are you? Well, in this context, hello, what's your name and how are you function as what? They function as SDs for talking. If I say hello, you're going to say hi. If someone asks me what's my name, I'm going to say Alex. And if they say, how are you? I'm going to say good. These are SDs. If the client is too slow to respond to the SD, what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with inter-response time? Inter-response time is not concerned with the SD. It's concerned with the responses. One response to the next response to the next response. Here, we're dealing with the SD to the first response. So that's going to be latency. Latency is time in between the SD and the first response. We need to reduce that time if the client is too slow. It's not frequency. We're not counting how often he responds. And it's not duration, okay, because we're not tracking the total time of the behavior, okay? We're tracking time in between. That's a key difference. IRT and latency are worried about time in between. Duration is worried about the actual behavior and time spent engaged in the behavior. So what dimension of responding should they target? Latency, time in between SDs to responding. The babysitter provides her clients with salty potato chips with nothing to drink while they watch a movie. Whenever a client says drink, the babysitter says use a full sentence. The client replies, "Can I have a drink, please?" And the babysitter gets them a drink. This exchange is an example of what? Two types of teaching you need to know for the RBT exam. DTT, or discrete trial, and naturalistic or incidental. So naturalistic and incidental are the same thing. Discrete trial is contrived. Rapid beginning and end of SDs to consequences to feedback over and over and over again. Naturalistic is uncontrived. It's occurring in the natural environment. Now, you can set up the environment in a way where you can use natural teaching, and that's what this babysitter does, right? The babysitter knows giving the client salty potato chips will increase the want for drink. The babysitter doesn't give them a drink and waits till the client says drink. Then the babysitter uses that as the opportunity to say, use a full sentence. Client replies, "Can I have a drink, please?" The babysitter has used this naturally occurring situation to teach. It's not tact training. It's not echoic training. Tacting is labeling. Echoic is repeating what someone says. We already went over why it's not discrete trial. Discrete trial is rapid trials over and over again. This is naturalistic. Yes, the babysitter modified the environment to create better opportunities to teach, but had the client never asked for a drink, babysitter might never offer a drink. That makes it naturalistic. Babysitter is waiting for the chance to help them or make them use a full sentence. This exchange is an example of naturalistic teaching. After weeks of reinforcement, your client satiated on the stimulus used as a reinforcer. If you want to increase the value of the satiated stimulus to the greatest extent, what would most likely be the best intervention? What does that term satiated mean? Think about satiation, think about deprivation. Deprivation says you're not getting enough. You haven't got enough of something. Satiation is the opposite. If you're satiated on something, if there's satiation going on, you've had too much. This can happen with reinforcers. If we use the same reinforcer too often or too much, clients can satiate and the value goes down. If we want to increase the value, once again, of a satiated stimulus, what will we do? Well, think about it. If they're getting it too much and the value is going down, what are you going to do? Well, stop giving it to them as much, right? Pretty simple. So what about A, thicken the schedule of reinforcement? Well, if we thicken a schedule, we're now giving reinforcement more often. We're not really worried about when reinforcement is being given. It's more about the stimulus. But in general, if you're going to want to decrease how often you're using this stimulus as a reinforcer, you're not going to want to thicken the schedule. B, present a different reinforcer. Presenting a different reinforcer might be okay, but what if you're still using the same reinforcer as well? It's not going to change the value. So B is okay, but can we find a better answer? C, stop using the stimulus as a reinforcer temporarily. Yes, regardless of what else you do, we need to stop using the stimulus as a reinforcer temporarily. This is going to decrease that satiation and once again, increase the value of the stimulus. D, pair the stimulus with other stimuli. You don't want to pair right now when the value is low. When you pair things, you want the value to be high. So if something is satiated, or somebody is satiated on a reinforcer and you want to re-increase that value, you want to stop using that stimulus as a reinforcer temporarily. Understanding the function of a behavior is the first step to properly treating the behavior. Why is it crucial to understand the function of each behavior? We talked a little bit about this in that first question. The function tells us why the behavior occurs. Okay. It's the most important thing in ABA. If we don't know why the behavior is occurring, we cannot treat it effectively. We cannot treat it ethically. Understanding the function of the behavior is crucial. A, function tells us what measurement to use for the behavior. Function can guide us to the measurement, but it's not going to automatically tell us what measurement to use. I can measure escape with frequency, duration, latency. Just because if it's escape doesn't mean I'm using a certain measurement. B, function tells us why the behavior is occurring. Yes, it's simple as that. Function is telling us, why is this behavior happening? If we know why the behavior is happening, what can we do? We can replace it. C, function tells us when we should reinforce the behavior. Nope, that's going to be our reinforcement schedule. And then function tells us what the behavior looks like. No, that's going to be topography. Why is it crucial to understand the function of each behavior? B, functions tells us why the behavior is occurring. Scotty is a computer programmer. He needs to learn a complicated task which involves multiple steps. After reviewing the task, Scotty knows about 80% of the steps before starting to learn. What type of task chain might be best for Scotty to use to learn this task? Another task chain question. Earlier, we talked about forward chaining. Forward chaining says what? Forward chaining says we reinforce first step first. Backwards chaining says we reinforce last step first. Total tasks say we teach the whole task chain. And when would we want to use total task chain? Well, you would want to use total task chain when somebody knows most of the chain already. We only need to teach what they don't know. In this case, Scotty needs a complicated task with multiple steps. Scotty knows about 80% of the steps. It's a perfect situation to use total task chain, right? He already knows 80% of the steps. There's no need to go through the song and dance of forward chaining and teaching one step at a time when he knows most of the steps already. Behavior chain interruption strategy is just a strategy for when the chain is known and we want to teach new behaviors. We would interrupt the chain in the middle of it. Typically, that's used only when the chain is pretty much fully known, though, so we don't have to worry about it here. Okay, thanks for watching. Check out rbtexamreview.com for all of our study materials, 3 practice exams, task list study guide, and the combo pack. It's our best deal. Questions, comments, let me know. I'd love to help. As always, work hard, study hard. See you soon.